Have you ever known someone who always had a bad reputation, but deep down they a really good person? Well, today I'm going to tell you a story of a misunderstood icon. Born January 18th, 1941 in Wynot, Mississippi, his parents is Eli Ruffin and Ophelia Ruffin. He's the third of four kids, and his siblings is Quincy, Jimmy, and Renea. He also had another sister, but she had passed away as an infant. David's father had worked as a truck driver for numbers of lumber mills, and his mother had worked from home. Now, when David was only 10 months, his mother had passed away. And this had left David and his siblings under his father's care. Now, David's father, he was a strict parent, and sometimes he was very abusive. His father had gotten remarried to a school teacher, and as a child, David and his family used to travel as a family gospel group, and they would open shows for Mahalia Jackson, the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi, and others. David, he would sing in the choir, talent shows, where just about wherever he could. And at the age of 14, he had left home with the guardianship of a minister named Eddie Bush. They had went to Memphis, Tennessee, with the purpose of pursuing the ministry. At age 15, he went to Hot Springs, Arkansas with jazz musician Phineas Newborn. They played at the 50 Grand Ballroom and Casino, and David, he was going by the name of Little David Bush. He sung at talent shows and he worked with horses at a jockey club. And eventually he became a member of the Dixie Nightingales. He also sung with the Soul Stringers after the departure of Johnny Taylor. Now, while David was a teenager, he had did a lot of traveling and he had met a lot of people on the way. He met Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Frankie Lyman, and Bobby Womack. Now, at this time, some of the singers that David had looked up to, like Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, had stopped doing gospel music at this time. David wanted to follow in that direction, so then Eddie Bush and his wife took David Ruffin, who was 16 at the time, to Detroit, where his brother Jimmy was already pursuing a career in music. And while he was pursuing a career in music, he was also working at Ford Motor Company. After moving to Detroit, David had recorded his first released records with songs You and I and Believe Me in 1958. He was still going under the name Lil David Bush, and David, he would later recall how he intentionally recorded a different kind of music that was strongly influenced by a smoother pop and R&B sound. In 1957, David had met Berry Gordy, and at the time Berry Gordy was just a songwriter with the dreams of running his own record label. And David, he had lived with Berry Gordy's father, who was a contractor. David had helped do construction work on the building that would become Hitsville, USA, the headquarters for Tama Records that would later become Motown. Now, David's brother would eventually sign to Tama Records as an artist, and in 1961, David had gotten married to Sandra Barnes, who he had three daughters with, Cheryl, Nidra, and Kimberly. David had also worked alongside another up-and-coming singer, Marvin Gaye, who was an apprentice at Anna Records, and this record label was owned by Berry Gordy's sister, Gwen Gordy Fuqua, and his songwriting partner, Billy Davis. Now, Gwen, she was asked about David back in 1988, and she had said that he was a gentleman and he always used yes ma'am and no ma'am. But the thing that really impressed her more than other artists is the fact that when he rehearsed as if he was on stage. David had created music as a vocalist and a drummer. In the Voice Masters, he had created a doo-wop style combo. This led David having a solo singing deal with Anna Records, but at this time his work was very unsuccessful. Eventually, David would meet up with the then up and coming group called the Temptations, and his older brother Jimmy had went on a Motown review tour with the Temptations, and he had told David that they was looking for someone to sing lead. And David had lived close to Otis Williams, a member of the Temptations, so every chance he got, he would always share to Otis of how much he would like to join the group. January 1964, David Ruffin had become an official member of the Temptations when founding member Al Bryan was fired from the group. January 9th, 1964, David and his brother Jimmy was both considered to be part of the group, but David was given the edge thanks to his performance skills. His skills was displayed when he had joined the Temptations on stage at the label's New Year's Eve party in 1964. That same year, he had had a son with his long-term girlfriend, Jenna Sapia. She named that son David E. Sapia, and David would later change his name to David Ruffin Jr. After joining the Temptations, David he was singing background while the role of lead singer had bounced back and forth between Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams. He did sing a few lead parts in the studio during his first year, but it was not released because they felt like it wasn't good enough to showcase his skills. Smokey Robinson, who had produced and co-wrote most of the Temptation songs at this point, had saw David Ruffin at this period of his time with the group as a sleeping giant. He said he had a unique voice that was mellow but yet rough. And Smokey Robinson thought if he could just write the perfect song for David Ruffin's voice, it would be a smash hit. So this song will lead into My Girl. And My Girl was recorded in November 1964 and was released a month later. This will become the group #1 hit, and the success of My Girl will elevate David Ruffin's role to lead singer and frontman for the group. After the success of My Girl, the Temptations have followed up with extremely successful songs with David Ruffin at lead. They follow up with songs like It's Growing, Since I Lost My Baby, I'm Losing You, and Ain't Too Proud to Beg. With David being 6'3" and always being passionate and dramatic about his performances, this had endeared him to the Temptations audience and fans. And according to Otis Williams, David was a natural comedian and hard-working singer when he had first joined the group. David's most notable thing that he had changed about the Temptations was that he had masterminded their trademark of the four-headed microphone stand. This enabled other members to sing and do their dances without having a crowd around one microphone, and this allowed the lead singer to sing in a separate microphone and do what the lead singer do. And in 1966, David had began dating Tammy Terrell after she had joined Motown Revenue, opening up for the Temptations. They had a relationship full of ups and downs, and he had surprised her with a marriage proposal. But after she had announced that engagement on stage, she had learned that he was already married. David then became very violent towards her as his drug problems started to get worse. And Tammy had ended a relationship after David had hit her in the head with his motorcycle helmet back in 1967. That same year is the first time David had went to get help for his drug problem. And if y'all want to learn more about Tammy Terrell, y'all can check out my video. It'll be popping up right here. That same year, a lot of difficulties with David had become a problem for the group, and he began missing rehearsals and performances, and then he even refused to travel with the group. And then after the Supremes had changed their name to Diana Ross and the Supremes, David had felt that he should become the focus point and demand that the group should be called David Ruffin and the Temptations.
I'm the one selling the records. They coming to see me.
They coming to see the Temptations.
Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis. You wish you could work it the way I do.
With the group already dealing with David Ruffin's ego, he had begun inquiring into the Temptations' financial records, demanding an accounting for the group's money, and this had caused a problem between David Ruffin and Berry Gordy. And in June of 1968, the Temptations had finally agreed that David Ruffin had crossed the line when he had missed a performance in Cleveland, Ohio on June 22nd. He had missed his performance to attend his girlfriend performance, who was named Barbara Gal Martin, and this is Dean Martin's daughter. David Ruffin was fired from the Temptations on June 27th and replaced with Dennis Edwards. He was a former member of the Contours, and he was a friend of David Ruffin, and also a friend of the groups before. Now David, he would encourage Dennis to take his place, and then David, he will begin popping up at the Temptations concerts during the first couple dates of Dennis being with the group. And when the group will sing songs that was sung by David Ruffin, David, he would walk on stage and snatch the microphone from Dennis, embarrassing the group, but at the same time he would entertain the fans because they all thought it was a part of the act. October 1968, David had filed a lawsuit against Motown Records seeking a release from the label and an accounting of his money. Motown had countersued to keep David from leaving the label, and eventually the case was settled. The settlement required David to remain on Motown to finish out his initial contract, and when David had originally signed to Motown, he had signed as a solo artist, and his contract was always different from the original Temptation members. And some believe that this has always cost a lot of fighting through the group. David's first single song, it was originally intended for the Temptations, and this song was called My Whole World Ended, and it was off the album that was called The Same Thing. And this was released in 1969, and it had reached the U.S. pop and R&B top 10. And this was followed by the 1969 album Feeling Good, and in 1970, David and his brother would record an album called I Am My Brother's Keeper, and they had minor hits like when My Love Hand and Your Love was Worth Waiting For. His next album didn't get released until 1973 when David was released from Motown. And originally his solo career had showed promise, but it had went downhill reportedly to his cocaine habits, and he didn't really have the support from Motown. And then 1976, David had gotten married again to a woman named Joy Hamilton. After leaving Motown in 1977, David recorded for Warner Brothers Records, releasing the album So We Changed in 1979 and Gentleman Ruffin in 1980. And in 1978, David Ruffin, he was arrested at a birthday party in Memphis, where he was charged with disorderly conduct for refusing to take several requests to leave. Was told to leave the area, and he allegedly made threats to a policeman and his family. David Ruffin, he would later sign to RCA Records, and he was accompanied by his former bandmate Eddie Kendricks. And Eddie Kendricks, he wanted to rekindle their friendship, especially after he started experiencing problems with the Temptations himself. And in 1982, David Ruffin, he was charged $5,000 and sentenced to 6 months in a low security prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. This was for failing to pay taxes with the amount of $310,000 over 3 years. And he had served 4 months. After serving 4 months in prison, David and Eddie had rejoined the Temptations for the recording of their album called Reunion. And they had a tour to promote the album too. And they had a smash hit song called Standing on Top with Rick James. The reunion was short-lived. However, As David Ruffin started to miss shows as a result of his cocaine addiction, this would lead into the group being fined thousands of dollars, and Otis Williams will fire David Ruffin from the group from a second and final time. And along with firing David, he had fired Eddie Kendricks because his voice was weakened due to heavy smoking, and Eddie Kendricks was fired by Christmas of 1982. May 19th of 1986, David Ruffin he would plead no contest to a charge of receiving stolen property worth less than $100 and concealing a stolen handgun. And he was fined $50 plus $100 in court costs. And in July of 1987, David he would spend a night in jail after he was arrested after a raid at a Detroit house, and he was charged with cocaine possession. In 1989, the Temptations was inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And after being inducted to the Hall of Fame, David Ruffin, Eddie Kendricks, and Dennis Edwards will begin touring with each other, and they will went by the name of Ruffin, Kendrick, and Edwards, the former leads of the Temptations. And in 1991, they completed a successful month-long tour of England, which had grossed nearly $300,000, and that's little over $500,000 in today's money. On June 1st, 1991, David Ruffin had died from a drug overdose from cocaine. David was reportedly collapsed at a crack house, and he had gone with his friend Donald Brown. According to authorities, he was taken to the hospital of University of Pennsylvania, where he had died from an overdose. Although David cause of death was ruled an accident, David Ruffin's family and friends suspected foul play, claiming that he had a money bag that had over $40,000 and it was missing from his body. However, his girlfriend at the time, Diane Showers, she was not surprised when she was informed about his death. She had said David had a lot of money and he wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. In the Temptation miniseries, it was depicted that David Ruffin's beaten body was being dumped in front of the street of a hospital where he had died at. And it was also stated that in the miniseries, his body would remain unclaimed in the morgue for a week after his death. And as a result, David's family had filed a lawsuit against NBC and other major players who was involved in making the film. And they were suing for defamation of character. And according to the plaintiff case, David he was actually taken to the hospital by a limousine and was escorted to the waiting area by his driver, and the driver had informed the attendants of his identity. David Ruffin's children further stated that his body was claimed by one of them within a few days. David Ruffin's funeral was held at New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit, and all the surviving members of the Temptations had sung "My Girl," and Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin also sung at the funeral, and Michael Jackson had volunteered to pay for the funeral, but he didn't attend the services. Now, we all have our own demons that we must fight. Some win, some lose. But one thing that you can't take away this man's legacy. He has an iconic voice that would be heard for generations. He was 50 years old. Rest in peace to a great musical icon. Now stay tuned for a preview to the next video.